For most of the Ming dynasty, the government had relatively little control over the money supply. It was functionally a bimetallic system. This means that value was set in two different metals, in this case, copper coins and unminted silver. But in the Ming, the state had relatively little control over either currency. Most of the copper cash was left over from the first few decades of Ming rule, or even from the Song dynasty, several hundred years prior. And as we have seen, a lot of the silver came from overseas. This was not the case at the start of the dynasty. The Ming founder, like his predecessors in the Song and Yuan dynasties, tried to exert firm control over the money supply. He outlawed the use of unminted silver and issued large amounts of paper and copper money. As in the Song, this paper money was a fiat currency. It could not be directly exchanged for precious metals. Instead, it was backed by the power of the state. As long as people respected the state's mandate, and as long as the state was responsible in its use of the currency, the paper money retained its value. But when the supply of paper money is not limited by the availability of copper or silver, there's always the temptation to print extra money to pay for things. This can cause inflation. This is exactly what happened in the early Ming. First, the Hongwu emperor printed money to pay for reconstruction after the civil wars in the late Yuan and early Ming dynasty. By the end of his reign, this paper money was worth only a third of its face value. This trend accelerated under the Yongle emperor, who printed large amounts of paper money to pay for the reconstruction of the Grand Canal, the movement of the capital from the south to the north, and for the Zhenghe treasure fleets that we have heard about in a previous module. By the end of his reign, the paper money was worth less than 1/10 of its face value. This inflation hurt the people in two ways. First, it functioned as an extra tax. The government would pay for things in paper money, but it would demand payment generally in copper cash or in goods whose value, as we have seen, came to be worth more than the face value of the paper money. The second way that inflation hurt is that it caused uncertainty. Storing money or trading with paper was always a risk because the government might print more paper, which would lower the value of the money that you were using. People preferred to store their money and to trade with copper cash, where the value was backed up by the value of the copper metal itself. But this led to hoarding of copper, which drove the value of copper even higher. Copper was also quite impractical for long-distance trade because of its weight. A single copper coin weighed about 3 grams, so 1,000 coins weighed around 7 pounds, or about 3.5 kilograms. By contrast, an equal value of silver weighed about 1/7 as much, so a pound or about 1/2 kilogram. We'll see that for this reason people came to prefer to store large amounts of value or to trade large value of goods using silver. In the long term, there were two main outcomes to the inflation of the paper money supply. First, there was a depression for most of the 15th century, both due to official restrictions on trade and due to effective restrictions on trade by a lack of money to use for exchange. Second, people increasingly turned to silver, which was illegal, for both storing and transferring money. By the mid to late 15th century, the government came to recognize these practicalities, and it changed its policy. Trade in silver was allowed, and taxes were now calculated in both copper and silver, and the paper money was abandoned. As the Ming economy recovered from this 15th century depression, there was a lot of demand for silver to enable the now booming long-distance trade. This was the situation heading into the 16th century, as Japanese silver and later New World silver poured into Ming markets to meet the demand for currency. By this point, the government had largely given up on trying to control the economy by controlling the money supply, and it turned to other policies to meet these needs.